Hey everyone, welcome back. So, Grounded 2 released into early access last week. I've been playing for the past few days, and after about 25 hours, I've pretty much wrapped up checking out all of the currently available content in this initial iteration of the game. And here today, what I want to do is basically give you my, I guess we'll call it an early review of this work in progress title. Like, how is the game as it sits today? You know, just up front, I'll say it's not perfect. There are definitely quite a few issues, which we'll cover, but overall, I've certainly enjoyed it. Like, I had a fun time in what is a fairly limited amount of time for the survival genre anyways, but it's a very good baseline. It's a good foundation. It needs to get some things addressed, but I'm definitely looking forward to seeing where it goes from here. All right, now let's go ahead and just jump right into all of the details, starting off with an explanation of the game itself, the setting, the premise, and its world. Now, like the original, Grounded 2 has you playing as one of 4 kids who, thanks to some science experiments, are now shrunk down to bug size, attempting to survive what is a fairly hostile environment. Although this time around, instead of being in a backyard, you find yourself in a massive public city park. So the park is broken into different zones, named sections, and each of these represent what are essentially the biomes of the game, with their associated plants, grasses, and other theming elements that you might expect. So to the far northwestern part of the map is Pine Hill. This has got pine trees and needles and cones all over the ground, giving this sort of like dense woodland forest vibe, almost like the Pacific Northwest. And then to the southwest, you've got this massive maple tree at the park's entrance with its fallen leaves and acorns, creating this very autumn and or fall inspired biome. Or to the southeast is a knocked over ice cream truck, and as such, with the ice and cream all over the place, it gives you what is essentially the snow region of the game. So there are currently 9 named areas, with more to come. We've got about a third of what will be the final map in this current initial version. And beyond the specific themings just mentioned, much of the park is just an assortment of grasses, plants, and weeds, with each zone having typically one prominent point of interest or feature, along with numerous smaller ones. For example, there's a massive picnic table with different foods scattered all about and infested by spiders. There's a fire pit with some knocked over coals that forms what is essentially a volcanic region. You've got an overflowing trash can with its spoiled food creating poisonous gas clouds in the vicinity. And then all about the entire map, you've got entrances to these underground burrows and layers of ants, spiders, and other bugs that extend across huge swaths of the map. These are labyrinths with winding halls in pretty much every direction. Again, as mentioned, there are plenty of smaller objects that become their very own points of interest for you to explore. You've got a lunchbox with sweets and candies that are a rare resource you can harvest to craft some magic-based gear, an empty terrarium that got knocked over with its prior inhabitants lurking nearby, and there are things like a news camera, an old magazine, a backpack, a fridge cooler, and plenty more. And beyond all of that, there's also various outposts and facilities which belong to the science organization that runs the experiments which put you into your current predicament. Alright, so that is essentially the premise, the setting, and the environment. What exactly are you doing? Well, for starters, this is a survival crafting game, and as such, it shares a similar loop to other games of the genre. You start with nothing, you go around gathering the first tier of materials, making that initial basic armor, weapons, and consumables until you can eventually upgrade your gathering tool, letting you progress to the next level, rinsing and repeating the process. As of now, there are 3 tiers of resources and their associated items to craft in the game, with more to come as we progress through early access. In fact, there are only like a few items in tier 3. Tiers 1 and 2 have a ton of items available. We've only got access to a handful of tier 3 items in this current build. Now, one nice thing that I want to note here as well is that they make use of an Omni tool, which functions as your one item to harvest all resources, rather than having to swap between 4 different pieces of gathering equipment like a shovel, a pickaxe, and a hammer. Instead, you've got one tool that does everything. Although there are separate upgrade paths, there aren't multiple tools taking up multiple slots. It's just one tool and you use it to harvest everything, which is one of many nice quality of life upgrades that this game has received over the first. Now, beyond making gear and consumables, you're also gathering resources for building a base. You can actually place a base anywhere you want, able to construct a dwelling made out of various materials. Of course, all of the expected stuff is here. You can place a foundation, walls, roof. You've got storage, crafting benches, cooking, water storage, and many others. There's also a system of base defense as well. Currently, you're able to place a few different traps and turrets, with the occasional invasion from these bugs that are being mind controlled by some mysterious individual. So outside of all the similarities that this game shares with the genre standards, it is given its own twist when you consider the game's setting. The fact that we are shrunk down to the size of an ant and exploring a park from that perspective, it really makes the whole gathering crafting loop of survival games feel a little bit more unique. Huge pine needles, blades of grass, and weeds are effectively your wood resource in the game. The airborne seeds of dandelions act as a slow fall glider. Water is actually harvested from droplets on the tips of grass and is most readily available in the early morning. You've got tiny thorns that can be harvested from plants and turned into arrows, or what would be a roaring campfire in some other game instead looks like the tiny flickering flame of a matchstick. There's just really a lot of great attention to the details of what a survival experience from the perspective of being the size of a bug would potentially look like. I think just across the board, this is really well done, and once more makes it feel like a bit of a fresh take on the relatively standard formula that you get from survival games. That's something that I've really enjoyed. All right, so let's talk about progression. You've got the main story quest with a mysterious narrative about what happened to the people who participated in the experiments prior to you, and then beyond unraveling the story as you play through the quest, you're going to be exploring each of the game's zones. It's pushing you into different areas while also unlocking new features and mechanics as you progress. One of the big features that you unlock after a few hours is the new mount system called buggies. Pretty clever. Here you go out and steal the eggs of either ants or spiders, and then you bring them back to your base, hatching them in a hatchery. In such, you get to claim it as your very own mount and or pet. They actually function as both. You can get up and ride them, and they're much quicker and can jump higher than you can, but also they aid in combat. You can manually attack them while you're riding them, or they'll just chill by your side and attack anything you get in combat with. They can also help in gathering and harvesting resources. Just across the board, these are very useful and a really nice inclusion. Now, in terms of character power progression, you get a few different sources here. There are, of course, gear and weapons as you're moving up and through the tiers, unlocking more powerful stuff as you kill and collect resources from increasingly difficult creatures and in harder areas that require upgraded versions of your tool. And I will say that they really lean into the traditional RPG roles with their weapons and gear. Essentially, there are perks and set bonuses on gear that basically let you play as a tank, a mage, a ranger, and a rogue, essentially. To enhance this further are these mutations. These are enhancements for the different types of weapons in the game, various combat abilities, exploration, and survival mechanics. And the way this works basically is you do stuff and you level up and you get perks. So for example, if you kill 40 creatures with staffs, you're going to get increased damage to your staff attacks. Once you discover a point of interest, you unlock the ability to run faster. Once you deplete your stamina 100 times, you can unlock the ability to regenerate stamina faster. At any point, you can have 2 of these mutations active at a time. The game by default has multiple slots, so you can swap between different setups essentially, and there's additional progression that lets you have 3 and 4 mutations active at a time as you progress further. Which brings us into the final form of power progression, which are the molars. Basically, you find teeth scattered about and hidden in certain locations across the map. Breaking them open then rewards you a point for passive buffs, increasing your health, your stamina, your healing, your active mutations, as just mentioned, as well as reducing your hunger and thirst drain. And then there are these rarer mega molars that let you increase consumable resource and arrow stack sizes, which again just essentially introduces some more quality of life. As for the game's combat, well, you are fighting bugs, surprise, from gnats, grubs, and mites to larger creatures like bumblebees, mosquitoes, and spiders. Oh dear lord, are there a lot of spiders. And I will say there is an arachnophobia mode. If Die Spinne happens to make you a bit uncomfortable, you can kind of circumvent this a bit, but boy, it's unsettling. I don't have arachnophobia, although I do find spiders unsettling, and I appreciate just how terrifying they are when they're so oversized. Now, the combat system itself is rather simplistic, but I will say it feels good. There's a nice sense of weight and impact to it. And the fact that you can use pretty much however many weapons you like also keeps things fresh. So there's an assortment of different weapons, many different ones for each category. Those categories include one-handed, shields, two-handed, dual-wielding, ranged, like bows basically, as well as magical staffs. And many different weapons. They come with different perks as well to them. And again, all all of this combined with the mutations and the gear system and the gear set bonuses, you can literally feel like you're playing. Like I started off as a ranged bow character with a armor set to go with it. Then I swapped to a tank build with a life leech, and then finally I've settled on playing as the mage. I've got basically a fire and a frost staff and a mage set that helps enhance that as well. It's really cool. I didn't realize that this game was gonna feel like a survival game slash RPG game with different playstyles. I like it quite a bit. The one thing I guess I'm missing right now is a healing class. I'd love to see if they incorporate that later down the road. So as for the overall gameplay loop, like what are you doing? Well, as mentioned, it's a survival crafting game. So you start with nothing, you got your story, you're going to be going around picking up basic resources, you'll make your first set of gear and weapons, get some consumables, you start working on your base. Following the main story quests all throughout is going to have you venturing into the different zones, going into harder areas with more difficult and more numerous creatures to engage with, exploring points of interest in the process, getting collectibles, powering yourself up, killing creatures for their resources that fuel the crafting. You're also finding teeth and unlocking mutations for that additional power progression beyond any gear that you craft, getting stronger, which then lets you take on the larger enemies like those massive spiders, the cockroaches, praying mantis, bumblebees, and more. You keep progressing the story, you keep exploring new areas, you keep getting more powerful. Eventually you'll get your tier 2 and your tier 3 weapons and armor, fending off the occasional base raid here and there in between, until you eventually get to the end of the story, have explored all of the zones and all of the points of interest. And that is essentially the game at the moment. I would say it's rather straightforward, but fun, and mostly I've just enjoyed the exploration and the challenge of combat, because combat can be quite difficult. All right, now let's go ahead and move into my impressions. As always, we're going to start off with the pros. For starters, I just think the entire premise and setting is great. It really is a nice spin on the genre, and to go along with this unique setting is a rather impressive level of attention to detail, which really has gone a long way in adding to the immersion. Like I said, the fact that when you have a campfire, it looks like a matchstick instead of a roaring fire, or the fact that when you're gathering water, you're doing so from dew droplets that collect on the tips of blades of grass, or the fact that at any point, because you are small and everything comparatively is oversized, you can look off at the distance at the hot dog stand, at the picnic table, and quickly get your bearings in the map without having to actually pull up the map itself. Like once you get familiar with the game and where each of those major points of interest are located, you can just use the environment as your navigation tool. You don't really need a compass. You can see, oh, there's the popcorn hot dog stand. My base is in that direction from my current position. I'm gonna go over there. Or, oh, look over there. That's the picnic table with the pine trees behind it. I know that's in the northwest corner. If that's where I want to go, that's where I'm headed. So yeah, they do a great job with the play space, and the fact that there's still much more to come has me excited and looking forward to how they progress with that. There are a lot of survival games out there, but quite a few exactly like this, and I've appreciated that. Beyond some issues, which we will cover in the next section, I will say just as a general statement, this is, I think, a solid foundation for what will hopefully become a great survival game when all is said and done. There's already some great quality of life in here, like the aforementioned Omni tool, which takes all of the harvesting tools and combines it into one item, or the fact that they've got the ability to deposit all items into chests that are in the nearby area. So you know how a lot of survival games will have you deposit all similar items from your inventory into the chest that you're interacting with? Well, in this game, there is a deposit all, and it's actually just even a keybind. It's going to put anything in your inventory that matches in any chest that you're standing by, automatically deposits it into any of them, so you don't have to go and interact with every chest and go deposit similar, deposit similar, deposit similar, deposit similar. You do it once, everything similar that's already in any chest around you is going to get filled up and your inventory gets emptied. Really nice, and I'm looking forward to seeing what else they add as well. The bug mounts and or pets and or combat allies is a really nice addition. I've really enjoyed them. They also too have their own like RPG stats. You can get better and worse versions for different things like speed, agility, combat capabilities, etc. I really like, as mentioned, kind of the RPG class mechanics that they lean into with the gear, weapons, and how frequently you use things, giving you additional perks. I really like like that. Speaking of which, there's already a ton of different gear options and sets in the game. So in my current build, I counted 19 different sets of gear that we have unlocked in tiers 1 and 2 with a couple of tier 3 sets. And given that the game isn't even close to finished, it looks like the final version is probably going to have like at least double the number of gear sets to work towards, which is really nice. Similarly, there are a ton of different weapon options already available. And all of this means just like lots of different play styles that you can mess around with. As mentioned, I started off going with a ranged bow build, then I swapped into a life leech tank, and then finally I ended up playing as a mage with an ice and fire staff. And I'm just looking forward to seeing what else they add to the game. Those are most of my pros here. Let's go ahead and now move into the cons. First of all, just simply put, it's early access. The game is not finished. Right now, we have got what is roughly a third of what is planned for the final 1.0 release version of the game. So there is still a lot more to come, but that also means there's a lot in the current game that isn't yet available. And then beyond that, with the early access version, there has been, unfortunately enough, quite a lot of performance and technical issues. So performance across the board seems pretty rough. That is the #1 complaint that I'm seeing from user reviews. And even on my rig, running an RTX 4090 and i9 14900K, and with 64 gigs of RAM, I have noticed a bunch of performance issues. The frame rate fluctuates a fair bit. I have had numerous hard crashes to desktop. I've had many more hard freezes where the game would just lock up for a solid 10 to 15 seconds before then picking up again. I started out playing solo and then eventually went into a multiplayer match playing with my friends, and multiplayer itself has a lot of separate issues. There seems to be a lot of desync when you're playing with friends, just constant. It's not exactly rubber banding, but everything feels like there's just a little too much latency to it. Other players and buggies also appear to be like at times be way lower frame rate than your own characters. Like my frame rate could be maybe a solid whatever 90 or 120, but then I look at my friends moving around and it looks like they're moving at 5 frames per second. It's just really off-putting. Then also setting up multiplayer, I gotta say that was kind of a pain. For whatever reason, everyone has to log into an Xbox account, and we're playing on Steam, on PC. We're playing on PC via Steam. We all had to log into Xbox accounts. Half of the group I was playing with didn't even have Xbox accounts, so they had to go set up an Xbox account, log in. Then we had to all add each other to our Xbox friends list on xbox.com or whatever, rather than just, it's a game on Steam, just open the game and invite your friends from your Steam friends list like 99.9% of all games on Steam do. They had you jump through these separate hoops, which I just really didn't like. And then a lot of technical issues, regard multiplayer or single player. We've come across quite a few bugs and glitches. The bugs themselves, the creatures we're fighting, seem to get stuck in the terrain fairly often. I would say if I had to guess, I've seen this happen like 20 different times throughout the course of playing over 25 hours. We kept, whenever you die, you drop your backpack and then you have to go retrieve it to get your resources back. Our backpacks just kept falling through the terrain. Apparently this was a known issue though, because there is a button in the game's menu to return all backpacks to the starting area. But just the fact that this kept happening was rather frustrating. And then also the mounts, we had the ants and lost access to them on a regular basis. Like either they would go out of range and instead of being resummoned like they should or going back to the nest, they would just disappear. Like our mounts would just be gone, nowhere to be seen. And then 30 minutes later, they would just reappear again. It's not how it's supposed to function, by the way. Like there's a whole system where the mounts are supposed to go back home, or you can summon them by whistling and they'll return to you within like 10 or 15 seconds. There were numerous occasions where our mounts just like they vanished from this plane of existence. Maybe they went to grounded 1 and hung out for a while and then came back to grounded 2. I don't know, but yeah, that's clearly not working as intended. And then the two other cons I want to mention first is I think the UI is quite clunky in a few areas. Much of it appears to be designed specifically for consoles and or controller and just doesn't feel or function right on a mouse and keyboard. And then finally, the game's just short, relatively speaking. Like for the survival genre, we've pretty much wrapped up our playthrough at around 25 or so hours. Now this will of course take more or less time depending on your playstyle. I'll also add that if you're playing entirely solo, you're probably going to get more hours out of it because it's going to be much harder to deal with some of the larger creatures. When we're playing in a group, we can kind of juggle the enemies by just whoever doesn't have aggro can freely attack, which is something you really can't do when you're solo. You can kind of do it with your buggy pet, but I digress. I would say 20 to 35 hours is like what you could roughly expect from this game, from the current build. And that's just a side effect of it not being finished, of course, but even not being finished for a survival game, it's kind of on the shorter side. Like even Enshrouded in its first early access iteration, I think I got 50 or 60 hours out of it. So it's not short by any means. This isn't a 5 hour, this isn't like a RuneScape Dragon Wild. It's like a 10-hour game. It's still over 20, but just want to put that out there. You know, it still certainly has a lot of work that needs to be done, but as mentioned at the top and in all of the pros, I have certainly overall enjoyed my time with the game. Now, there is a little bit of a fatigue with the whole early access model, like playing this truncated version of a game and then coming back in a few months for some new stuff, and then again a few months later, and then maybe a year later when it's finally finished. But that's kind of like a wider topic. It's not really specific to this game. And I mean, really, it's fine, whatever. Like if I play and I have fun, that's all I'm looking for, really. And I will say the game is fairly good overall, and it's done fairly well as a result. It's reached a peak player count of nearly 50,000 concurrents just on PC alone. By comparison, the original game peaked at 32,000 concurrents, and right now it's got a mostly positive review score on Steam, which is impressive considering its rather limited content and fairly widespread technical and performance issues. Certainly, I do think it's got a bright future, and if their support of the original Grounded is any indication, it should be doing just great in like a few months to a year from now. In fact, they already have a detailed roadmap outlining their plans over the course of the next year, which in summary, we're going to get new armor, weapons, and consumables, brand new enemy creatures from crickets, earwigs, oh god, aquatic creatures, and various bosses. There will be new variants of bugs along with bug mutations, additional mounts, some more base building options, tons of quality of life improvements planned, and as already mentioned, they will be tripling the size of the playable area. This additional space, in fact, is already outlined on the in-game map, and you can even see some of the work in progress points of interest off in the distance if you go to the edges of what is currently playable. I've enjoyed the game, I definitely have, though I would say I am hesitant on whether or not I would recommend purchasing it at this very moment. Not because I don't think it's good, because I do think it's good. There are issues for sure, but I'm counting on them ironing those out. I think really it's just like, if you do buy it, realize it's far from complete, maybe a little bit more so than what you typically are used to from an early access release. In fact, I'd almost even just recommend, if you haven't already, buying and playing the original Grounded first, and then if you like that, maybe come back in a few months to a year when Grounded 2 is a bit closer to being complete and has had its performance, technical, and content issues hopefully sorted out. That said, I am fairly confident when all is said and done that this game will be an easy recommendation. It's just not quite exactly there at this moment. I do like it. I did have fun, but with some caveats. Certainly, though, I will be revisiting the game down the road, so do expect an update video from me at some point in the future. That is all for today, though. Thank you as always for watching. Hope you enjoyed. See you next time.